G'day, my name's Coach Steve and this is Coach's Kitchen. Have you ever wanted to know how to make your own preservative-free, additive-free, delicious homemade sourdough bread, all for less than $2 a loaf? If the answer is yes, then watch this video and we'll show you how. The first thing you'll need to do is start your own sourdough starter culture. This provides all of the yeast and lactic acid bacteria for you to leaven your bread and develop all the classic flavour, texture and smell of a sourdough loaf. This process does take up to 10 days, but once it's established, your sourdough starter culture will last for years. In a container with a loose fitting lid, add 20 grams of whole wheat flour, 20 grams of tepid water. Try and use bottled water rather than tap water because the chlorine in tap water inhibits the growth of the yeast and the bacteria. Give it a bit of a mix and then put it in a warm, draft-free area for 24 to 72 hours to allow the yeast and the bacteria to multiply. So anytime after 24 hours that you can see tiny air bubbles on the surface of your culture, it's time to move on to step 2. Add 40 grams of whole wheat flour, preferably organic unbleached flour, as this is more likely to contain the yeast and bacteria that we're after. 40 grams of tepid bottled water. Give it a mix. Put the loose lid back on and return it to our warm, dark, draft-free area for another 24 hours. By now, you'll notice that the culture is slightly more runny and it'll have lots of tiny air bubbles on the surface. If you give it a smell, you'll notice that it smells slightly vinegary, slightly nutty, and a bit less floury than it did to start with. So now you can add 80 grams of whole wheat flour, 80 grams of tepid bottled water. Give it a good stir so that all the flour is mixed in well. Then you can put the lid back on loosely and return it to our warm, draft-free, dark area for another 24 hours. If at any stage you notice a brown, runny liquid forming on the surface of your culture, don't worry about it. It's just a byproduct of the yeast and the bacteria. It just means they're in a bit of a starvation mode and they might just need a tablespoon of flour to give them another kickstart. So at this stage, we're going to throw away half of our starter culture. Tip half of it into your compost bin, leaving the other half remaining in the container. Because the yeast and bacteria should be thriving at this stage, we're going to give them a bit of an energy kick by adding some plain flour into the mix. So we'll add 25 grams of plain baker's flour, 25 grams of our organic whole wheat flour, then 50 grams of our tepid bottled water. We'll give that a mix, making sure all the flour has mixed in well. Put the lid back on loosely and return it for another 24 hours to our warm, draft-free, dark area. And then we're going to repeat this step for another 6 days in a row. So after repeating the last step of discarding half of your starter culture and adding back your whole wheat flour and plain flour mixture for 6 days in a row, you should see lots of tiny bubbles on the surface of your culture. This is a great indication that you are now ready to use your culture to bake your first loaf of delicious and nutritious homemade sourdough bread. Sign up to the Davey Black YouTube channel right here so that you don't miss the next 2 videos in this series on how to make your perfect sourdough loaf every time and how to maintain this starter culture so that you can continue to make delicious bread for years to come. Thanks for watching. My name's Coach Steve and that was Coach's Kitchen.